February 14th, 2020. A day meant for love became a nightmare that would shake the small college town of Fort Valley, Georgia, to its core. While couples across America exchanged roses and chocolates, a brilliant young woman's life was being stolen away in what would become one of the most chilling cases of domestic violence escalation ever documented. 23-year-old Anitra Gun should have been celebrating. She was weeks away from graduating with her agriculture degree from Fort Valley State University, a historically black college that had become her second home. The Atlanta native had overcome tremendous odds to reach this milestone. After losing her mother as a child, she and her younger brother were raised by their devoted father, Christopher Gunn.
And that he started to choke. And that she fought at first, correct? And then he said to you that it looked like she just gave up because she wanted to be with her mother. And that's her mother who's dead.
I can sympathize with the family. I truly do. I have daughters. I even have one in college, and something like that would happen to her, I would be devastated. But my son didn't do this. He was raised the right way. He's not violent, never been in a fight, never having a criminal background. He's good. He's a good kid, a good soul, serving our country.
But success had never come easy for Anitra. She balanced her demanding coursework with shifts at 1836 Restaurant and Lounge, serving tables to pay her way through school. Her friends described her as the type of person who lit up every room she entered, kind-hearted, ambitious, and fiercely determined to build a better life for herself and her family. What they didn't know was that beneath her radiant smile, Anitra was trapped. Like her, he had lost his mother at a young age and understood the pain of growing up without that maternal presence. Their connection felt destined, almost too perfect to be real. But perfection, as Anitra would learn, was just another form of prison. What friends and family initially saw as a devoted relationship slowly revealed itself to be something far more sinister.
Very close relationship with her. She was just like a niece to me.
DeMarcus Little's love wasn't devotion, it was possession. His protection wasn't caring, it was control. And his promises weren't commitments, they were threats wrapped in romantic language. The warning signs had been building for months before that fatal Valentine's Day. Text messages recovered by investigators painted a horrifying picture of psychological warfare. Anitra had tried repeatedly to break free from Little's grip, only to be pulled back in through a calculated cycle of manipulation that experts would later recognize as textbook domestic abuse. In November 2019, Anitra had reached her breaking point. She told Little they needed to stop speaking altogether, that every conversation left her feeling manipulated and drained. His response was swift and devastating. He threatened suicide, blaming her for pushing him to that edge. Then silence. Hours of terrifying silence as Anitra reached out, genuinely concerned for his welfare despite everything he had put her through. It was all a lie. A cruel manipulation designed to regain control over her emotions and her life. When Little finally responded, he told her his suicide attempt had failed, but his manipulation had succeeded. The message was clear. She belonged to him, and he would use any means necessary to keep her. The psychological abuse escalated throughout the winter. Little accused Anitra of being unfaithful, demanded to know her whereabouts at all times, and threatened violence against any man he believed was interested in her. He even showed her screenshots of messages where he offered to pay someone $200 to harm a man she was allegedly seeing. But the most chilling aspect of Little's behavior was how he masked his threats in language that sounded almost romantic. He called her his soulmate, while simultaneously warning that his mercy has limits. He spoke of their destiny together, while making it clear that if he couldn't have her, no one could. The final warning came just 2 weeks before Valentine's Day. Anitra woke up to the sound of shattering glass and discovered that someone had slashed her tires and thrown bricks through her windows. Though she initially told police she didn't know who was responsible, the truth was more frightening than she could admit, even to herself. February 13th, 2020. The night before Valentine's Day, Anitra attended what would be her last social gathering. a house party with friends who knew nothing about the terror that had been consuming her life. She laughed, she danced, she tried to pretend everything was normal. But when the party ended around 11 p.m., she left with the very person who had been orchestrating her psychological imprisonment. Little he had become. They went to a Waffle House after the party, sharing what would be their last meal together. Little was charming, attentive, everything she remembered from their early days together. He walked her to her car, kissed her goodnight, and promised to see her the next day. For a brief moment, Anitra might have believed that maybe, just maybe, things really could go back to how they used to be. But the next morning would prove that some people don't change. They just get better at hiding who they really are. February 14th, 2020, began like any other Valentine's Day. According to the testimony that would later emerge in court, Little had poured his heart out to her that morning. He spoke of soulmates and destiny, of a love that transcended all understanding.
I was one I was talking to her, and she was like, trying to tell her how I feel about how, how much I love her and stuff. He was like, she ended up laughing in my face. He was like, Brian, I don't know what happened. I just blacked out. And I don't hear it. Then he was like, when he was like that, like, he just grabbed me and started choking her.
He begged her to take him back, to give their relationship one more chance, to believe in the future he had mapped out for them. And then Anitra did something that would cost her everything. She laughed. Not maliciously, not cruelly, but perhaps in the way someone laughs when they finally see the absurdity of their situation. Maybe she finally understood that his grand declarations of love were just another form of manipulation. Maybe she realized that she deserved better than a man who claimed to love her while terrorizing her. Whatever prompted that moment of clarity, it would be her last. What happened next would be reconstructed piece by piece through forensic evidence, witness testimony, and Little's own contradictory statements. According to his friend Jivon Abron, who would later testify against him, Little claimed he blacked out after Anitra laughed at his romantic proclamations. But investigators would prove that what followed was anything but a moment of temporary insanity. It was a calculated murder followed by an elaborate cover-up. The strangulation was personal, intimate, and cruel. Anitra fought for her life, but Little's military training and superior strength made resistance futile. As the life drained from her eyes, she may have found a final, tragic peace in the knowledge that she would finally be free from his control. But Little's plan was far from over. What followed was a methodical attempt to create the perfect crime. He placed Anitra's body in the trunk of her own car and drove toward the Crawford County line, where dense woods would provide the perfect hiding place. The rough terrain caused her car's front bumper to break off, a detail that would later prove crucial to the investigation. After disposing of her body under a thin covering of branches and debris, Little drove back to Fort Valley and abandoned her car just blocks from her home. He kept her cell phone, using it to send misleading messages to her friends while simultaneously creating a false alibi for himself. The messages sent from Anitra's phone that morning were designed to make it look like she was meeting someone new, someone other than Little. He sent flirtatious texts about meeting up with an unknown man, trying to create the impression that she had moved on from their relationship. But the messages were so out of character that her friends immediately knew something was wrong. Sierra Stewart, Anitra's best friend, received several of these bizarre messages. The writing style was wrong, the terminology was wrong, and most tellingly, the timing was wrong. Why would Anitra be texting about meeting a stranger when she had a job interview scheduled for that morning? David Howard, known to friends as Scoot, lived just doors down from Anitra's house on West Church Street. That morning, he received some of the most telling evidence of Little's deception. The messages from Anitra's phone asked for his address so she could drive over to see him, a request that made no sense since she could literally see his house from her front door. But it was what happened next that would ultimately seal Little's fate. Scoot watched from his driveway as a black Toyota Corolla with distinctive red pinstripes, Little's car, circled the block 5 or 6 times. The driver appeared to be looking for something or someone, and Scoot had the presence of mind to record the license plate number. When Anitra's father, Christopher, arrived from Atlanta that afternoon, he found a law enforcement response unlike anything the small college town had ever seen. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation, Fort Valley Police, and Peach County Sheriff's Office formed a joint task force dedicated to finding his daughter. Their commitment was absolute. No stone would be left unturned. The search initially focused on the area around Little's aunt's house on Chestnut Hill Road, where he claimed he had last seen Anitra alive. But as investigators dug deeper into the couple's relationship, a darker picture began to emerge. Friends and family members came forward with stories of escalating abuse, threats, and psychological manipulation that painted Little not as a grieving boyfriend, but as a dangerous predator. The discovery of Anitra's abandoned car provided the first major break in the case. Hidden inside was evidence that would eventually link Little to the crime: fingerprints and DNA that couldn't be explained away by their romantic relationship. More importantly, the car's damaged condition told a story of rough terrain and desperate concealment, but it was the cell phone evidence that would prove to be Little's undoing. In an apparent attempt to appear helpful, he told investigators that Anitra had accidentally shared her location with him and that her phone had pinged near her home. When officers checked his device, however, they found that the location was actually much further south, in a drainage pipe where Little had disposed of the evidence. The discovery of Anitra's body on February 18, 2020, brought the search to its tragic conclusion. A Peach County Sheriff's deputy, patrolling the area during a break in the weather, noticed a path leading into the woods that showed signs of recent vehicle activity. Following his instincts, he walked deeper into the forest and found what no one wanted to find: the concealed remains of a young woman whose only crime was falling in love with the wrong person. The autopsy confirmed what investigators already suspected. Anitra had died from manual strangulation, with additional evidence suggesting she had been struck and dragged to the location where she was found. The medical examiner's report painted a picture of a violent struggle, of a young woman who had fought desperately for her life before succumbing to her attacker's superior strength. Within hours of the discovery, Little was arrested on charges of criminal damage to property, the broken windows and slashed tires from 2 weeks earlier. It was a holding charge, a way to keep him in custody while investigators built their murder case. But Little's arrest would prove to be just the beginning of a legal drama that would captivate the region for the next 2 years. The evidence against Little was overwhelming, but it was largely circumstantial. Cell phone records placed him at the scene of the crime, but he claimed the technology was unreliable. His fingerprints were in her car, but they had been dating for months. His story kept changing, but he insisted he was just confused and traumatized by the loss of his girlfriend. What prosecutors needed was a witness who could connect all the pieces, someone who could provide direct evidence of Little's guilt. They found that witness in the last person anyone expected: Little's best friend and confidant, Javon Abron. Abron had initially lied to investigators, claiming he knew nothing about what had happened to Anitra. But as the evidence mounted and the reality of his situation became clear, he made a decision that would change everything. He decided to tell the truth. On the Sunday following Anitra's disappearance, Javon Abron and DeMarcus Little left church together and went for a drive. It was during this drive that Little made a confession that would ultimately send him to prison for life. According to Abron's testimony, Little freely admitted to killing Anitra, describing in chilling detail what had happened in those final moments. He had placed Anitra's body in her car's trunk, driven to the remote location where she was found, and then carefully disposed of evidence in multiple locations. Abron's testimony revealed that he had unknowingly assisted in the cover-up when he picked up Little near where Anitra's car was abandoned. Little had called him for a ride, claiming his car had broken down, and Abron had arrived to find his friend standing near a damaged white Chevy Cruze. When Abron asked if it was Anitra's car, Little had dismissed the suggestion, insisting it couldn't be hers. But the most damning part of Abron's testimony was his description of being taken to see Anitra's body. According to his account, Little had led him to the wooded area where she was hidden and asked for help moving part of her car's bumper. Abron, in shock and disbelief, had refused to get out of the vehicle, but his silence had made him complicit in the crime. The testimony painted a picture of a man who was not only capable of murder, but calculating enough to manipulate even his closest friends into becoming accessories after the fact. Little's ability to compartmentalize his actions, to attend church and maintain normal relationships while hiding such a horrific secret, revealed a level of psychological manipulation that went far beyond typical domestic violence. The trial of DeMarcus Little began in March 2022, nearly 2 years after Anitra's murder. Prosecutor Don Baskin faced a unique challenge in the case. While the evidence against Little was substantial, much of it was circumstantial. More importantly, he knew that some jurors might struggle to understand why Anitra had repeatedly returned to an abusive relationship, potentially blaming her for her own death. Baskin used a powerful metaphor to help the jury understand the psychology of domestic abuse. He compared Anitra's situation to a frog in a pot of slowly boiling water. If she had been thrown directly into the abuse, she would have jumped out immediately. But the manipulation and control had escalated gradually, making each new transgression seem only slightly worse than the last. The defense strategy, led by attorney Benjamin Davis, focused on Little's character and military service. They portrayed him as an upstanding young man who had dedicated his life to serving his country, suggesting that such a person could never be capable of murder. They argued that the prosecution's case was built on unreliable testimony from a friend who was trying to save himself from criminal charges. But the prosecution's case was built on more than just Jivan Abron's testimony. Cell phone records, forensic evidence, and Little's own contradictory statements created a web of evidence that was impossible to ignore. Most damaging were the text messages between Little and Anitra, which revealed months of escalating threats and manipulation. The jury heard about Little's previous acts of violence against Anitra, including the incident 2 weeks before her death when he had slashed her tires and thrown bricks through her windows. They learned about his threats to harm other men he believed were interested in her, including his offer to pay someone $200 to attack a perceived rival. After deliberating for approximately 3 hours, the jury returned with a verdict that would bring both justice and closure to those who had loved Anitra Gunn. On the charge of malice murder, they found DeMarcus Little not guilty, suggesting they believed his claim that he had not planned to kill her in advance. However, on the charges of felony murder and aggravated assault, they found him guilty, recognizing that regardless of his intent, he had unlawfully taken a life during the commission of another crime. The distinction between malice murder and felony murder might seem technical, but it reflected the jury's understanding of the complex dynamics of domestic violence. They recognized that while Little may not have woken up that morning planning to kill Anitra, his pattern of abuse and control had created the conditions that made her death inevitable. Judge sentences Little to life in prison without the possibility of parole, the maximum sentence available under Georgia law. In announcing the sentence, the judge noted that Anitra Gunn would never be able to breathe air on this earth again, and that it was therefore appropriate that Little never be able to breathe free air for the rest of his life. The case had broader implications beyond just one tragic relationship. It highlighted the epidemic of domestic violence on college campuses and the particular vulnerability of young women who are trying to build independent lives while navigating complex romantic relationships. Investigators confirmed that Gunn died from manual strangulation, a particularly personal and violent form of murder that underscored the intimate nature of the crime. Anitra's story became a cautionary tale about the warning signs of domestic abuse and the importance of taking threats seriously. Her friends and family established memorial funds in her name, focusing on domestic violence awareness and prevention programs at historically Black colleges and universities. For her father, Christopher, the verdict brought a measure of justice, but could never restore what had been taken from him.